Axiom Esports is proudly sponsored by PlanetSide 2. Play for free at planetside2.com. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit, some more Starbow action, and here's a really interesting one. We've got someone that knows this mod inside out. He's a veteran of the mod. He goes by the name of Hideortoss. He is in the blue trunks and he is playing Terran to the northeast of Fighting Spirit versus his opponent, the Korean pro gamer, to the southwest position in the light blue trunks. Playing Protoss, it is Ax.Crank. This is going to be an interesting one, simply because it's a Korean pro gamer who is very experienced in Brood War versus, well, not a Korean pro gamer who is very experienced in Starbow. So the question is, who is better? The one that knows the mod the best, or the one that has the best mechanical skill? I guess we're gonna find out. It's gonna be a Protoss versus Terran, so you can expect to see quite a few Dragoons and also quite a few siege tanks. The way that things worked back in Brood War for the longest time, from what I've been told and how I understand it, is that a lot of Terran players would go mech against Protoss. They would use tanks, and they would use vultures. They would very much use tanks against Dragoons for the most part, because they were very, very dangerous. And they would be able to use vultures for harass and deploy spider mines, and set up really good defensive positions. And then they would use drop harassment in order to do damage. And they'd also do things like vulture run-bys. The Protoss player, on the other hand, would try and build up a good Dragoon force. They might decide to rush early on and get very early Dragoon range to allow them to harass and contain. And then they would switch between Dragoons and Zealots where necessary, and then perhaps tech to something else. They maybe would go for Arbiters to help out. So we're going to see what Crank decides to come up with, and how this map actually plays out between a Starbow veteran and a Brood War veteran. Now, you might notice, if you're not familiar with Starbow and you're thinking, oh, this is just a Brood War clone, well, no, because there's a Marauder in it, as I think you can very clearly see here. So Marauders can actually be built with a reactor, so that's something to consider here. A tech lab is required for Reapers, the Reaper being a Starcraft 2 unit, but this is the older version of the Reaper. This is the Reaper with the grenades. You have to research the upgrade for that, but that means that you do have a jumping harassment trooper that can do huge amounts of damage to buildings. Then, of course, you can build medics, which you cannot build in huge numbers simply because you can't put a reactor on there to get it, and you've got a ghost. So we will see. You're also going to notice a little bit of commentary here from December. Now, December is one of the developers for Starbow, and it's also one of the casters for it as well. So you're going to see some interesting information posted throughout this. Bunker going up pretty early here for Hideortoss. I have a feeling he is expecting some kind of Dragoon aggression, and he would be right to suspect it. Crank has already built one, and he's working on a second. Dragoons take 45 seconds to build, and he's also researching Singularity Charge. What does that do? It is Dragoon range, really, as simple as that. You research it from here. It increases the attack range of Dragoons by 2. That's quite significant, because by default they only have 4. So if you go up to 6, what happens is early game you can actually outrange a bunker. Marines in this version only have a range of 4. They can get something called the Barrel Compensator upgrade to go up to 5, but this bunker is going to be quite nicely outranged, since with the bunker range you're only going to get +1, so that takes it up to 5. So Crank's going to have to wait for that upgrade to finish, and that's fine, because he has a second Dragoon coming across the map here. And he's about to finish his Singularity Charge upgrade. In the meantime, Hideortoss is going for the barracks right there, straight into the factory, and it looks like he's going to try and get a pretty early tank. He's going to need that in order to deal with these Dragoons. Marines will not deal well with them. You can get Stim and do it that way, but on their own, Marines are absolutely terrible against Dragoons. Dragoons will be able to out-micro them, they outrange them, they do more damage. It's not really a good situation for Marines to be in. So this bunker's going to start to take damage now that Singularity Charge has been finished, and the SUVs are going to get pulled off the line to start to repair it, and hold on as best he can. He's immediately grabbing Siege Tech, knowing that Dragoons are on the way. He's even using the Overcharge ability from his Orbital Command, which, as you can see, drops down and overcharge for 15 seconds or so. In fact, 20 seconds, and increases the factory build time by 50%. In barracks, it actually increases it by 100%. That's very nice. Crank's not going to be able to break through this, and Hideortoss actually going to bring his tank out, which does massive damage against these. And tanks are much easier to micro here as well, because the turrets can actually point backwards as they retreat. So there's a lot more tank micro you can do, and they have 7 range even by default. They can do a significant amount of damage. Tank actually outranges a Dragoon, and it can move pretty quickly too. Question is how fast. It doesn't move as fast as a Dragoon, but he can get some good shots off here. He's weakening the shields on these Dragoons, and he's trying to hold this off until Siege Tech is up, at which point the Dragoons will not really be able to attack. You'll notice that Fighting Spirit has a really narrow choke. A lot of the Starbow maps do. It's designed to give a defender's advantage, and it's also designed to punish those who are using large death balls of units, because AoE in this game is very powerful. So a Siege Tank is going to do huge amounts of damage when deployed. You're going to see exactly how much. 70 with a range of 12. That's absolutely massive. That would smash apart Dragoons very quickly. Now, I think Crank has realized, yep, this is not going to work out. So he builds a robo facility, and he builds a Reaver. Oh, yes, you haven't seen these in a while. These are very slow-moving harassment units. However, they can be comboed with these dropships. In this case, the shuttle is not a part of Starbow. They replaced it with the Warp Prism because they found the Warp Prism more interesting. By default, the Warp Prism moves pretty slowly, but there is an upgrade that allows you to make it go much faster from the... It's not from the observatory. It's from somewhere else. I can't quite remember where from. But there is an upgrade. Just trust me on this. All of the observatory upgrades are, in fact, for the observer. But this Warp Prism is not going to move too quickly, at least for the time being. But it does have a Reaver in it. Now, Reaver drop harass is something that was very common in Starcraft Brood War, and it's very dangerous because these things load up scarabs and then fire these scarabs, and they're really nasty, explosive AoE effects. They can do huge damage, but a Reaver outside of a dropship is extremely slow and very vulnerable. So these things can be very dangerous. You also have to pay for each scarab you fire, so you better be pretty careful with it. Banshee is being upgraded right now with piercing rockets, which increases the attack range of it. And we're looking for a Reaver drop. Here it comes. Reaver has been dropped. Zealot coming down here as well. He is building a Scarab. He actually Oh, there we go. I was going to say I thought he'd forgotten to build one, but no, he's constructing a new Scarab. He's launching it towards the tanks. He's trying to take those out. Not doing a huge amount of damage here. Zealot is making its way in. Another Scarab fires off, killing off a siege tank. He builds up another, fires it towards the mineral line, does a little bit of damage, and now has to back away. So, not the best Reaver drop harass ever, but you see, you drop it, you fire, and then you pick up to make sure you don't take any more damage. Crank would really like to take out that siege tank. He's menacing it, trying his best to do that. There's a Goliath being built to try and deal with that, but the Banshee's already out, so that's going to punch its way through the Reaver quite easily. So as you can see, Hideortoss is starting to build some Goliaths to try and ward off that drop harass, make sure that he has something that can fire into the air. In the meantime, Crank takes his third base. Expansions are very, very common in Starbow, simply because the way that you mine means that anything past the first SCV can be a little bit less effective. In fact, Hideortoss is very much oversaturated on this, and that's going to cause him a few problems. Crank, on the other hand, will want to build probes at a reasonable rate. He may end up overbuilding them because he's used to StarCraft 2, and you don't necessarily need too many of them. And that's something to bear in mind. But the way that I had it explained to me is that there's something called mineral bouncing. Oh, here we go. I'll explain that in a moment. The Banshee goes into the cloak there. Now, Banshee Cloak is actually a cooldown-based ability, as you can see. It cloaks you for only 6 seconds. Now, Banshees are a lot faster in this version at speed 3.25. But yeah, there's that 6-second cloak that you can use, and there's no energy on these whatsoever, so they can't be feedbacked or anything along those lines. They also fire their missiles in a slightly different way, which is a little bit interesting. But he's got a lot more range on this as well. You can do a lot more with the micro on a unit like this, but it does a little bit less damage. They only do 8, I believe, instead of the usual 12 from StarCraft 2, so you're not going to see probes go down quite as quickly. It takes 3 shots instead of 2. Another Banshee coming in. Good damage being done by Hideortoss and forcing Crank to pull off his mineral line there. And I believe that, yeah, that Reaver is still around, but Crank is currently a little bit too busy defending. He's now going to move in. Here we go. And he's got the Warp Prism speed upgrade as well. So that's going to be pretty handy for him. This Banshee's done pretty well. Hideortoss taken out 10 probes with it so far. The observers are out, and Crank's going to have to use a lot of them. You notice there's like 6 observers, and you'll be thinking, whoa, 6 observers. I've never seen that in StarCraft 2. Yeah, you wouldn't, because it's a terrible idea most of the time. You don't want to have 6 observers. But you need them here. There are no watchtowers. Lots of spider mines going down. Hider trying to bait the Protoss army into the spider mines. However, Crank is able to shut most of them down, loses a couple of zealots in the process. You got to be pretty quick to kill those. And Hider's going to try and break through here, but Crank is actually walled off with pylons, which is surprisingly effective. Now, there's a couple of rules you need to bear in mind with something like Starbow, which will tell you, well, why are those vultures not breaking through the pylons? Well, one, it's the way that the armor system works. Oh, hold that thought, never mind. Oh, I was thinking about going for a Reaver drop, but that didn't happen. Anyway, the armor system works a little bit differently, meaning that the vultures do very little damage to buildings. So you can't really break through a 3-pylon wall off very easily with vultures. And secondly, if you're firing up onto high ground, you actually have a 50% miss chance. This is something from Brood War, and it's also something that you might remember from Warcraft 3. They took it out in Starcraft 2. But they decided to keep it in Starbow because they felt that it worked for the particular theme. So what that means is that if you're going to try and break through that, you're going to be in an awful lot of trouble if you do it with vultures. It takes a lot of work. Crank is able to catch these vultures out in the open and deal significant damage, kills off the spider mines. And the Dragoons deal with those quite nicely. There's currently 26 vultures, but there's 13 Dragoons, so I would expect those vultures to die pretty quickly against something like that. Crank gonna try and get in again with this Reaver. Can he actually get a good drop in place? Hider picks up his tank to make sure that it doesn't get dropped on and killed by that Reaver. I'm trying not to say Reaper here. This is really difficult. I'm used to doing that. Uh-oh, there's an opportunity. Crank looking for the drop right here on top of the SCVs. Will he be able to get it? Nope. He says, I don't think that's a good idea. I want to save my Reaver for later. More dropships being built by Hider. Now, dropships here do have an afterburner ability. However, what they don't have is any kind of medevac ability, so they're not going to be healing anything. But this is fine. He's playing a mech style. He doesn't need healing right now. What dropships, god damn it, are used for, of course, is harassment as well as evacuating units. They're also used for defense, because you want to be able to pull tanks up and drop them in the places that you need. And tank harass is very viable here as well, because there is actually an upgrade which allows the dropship to pick up deployed tanks. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? But it exists. I have no idea where it is, but it exists. I know that for a fact. Maybe it's on the fusion core. Banshee harass continues over here. The Reaper is coming in along the top. It may be able to do damage, but there's a couple of missile turrets, so it seems fairly unlikely. There's also a tank ready to throw that back. And Hider is starting to set up a large minefield. There's a ton of spider mines all over the map in large clumps. Those can be very dangerous if they manage to catch the Protoss player. Crank is posturing, looking to try and go in. Bunch of vultures trying to blast their way through. You'll see how little damage they actually do to the pylon, as the pylon armor plating is very resistant to that kind of stuff, but once they break through, that could be dangerous. Banshee harass comes in on this base, and all the Banshees are going to go down by the looks of it. The Dragoons managed to sort those out quite quickly. However, a drop comes in, and Hider is able to drop his siege tank in play, and this thing is doing 70 damage, so it is going to massively destroy this mineral line. It's going to get absolutely gutted. And in the meantime, actually, the probes have been put in there. There's a hole in that wall off, and the vultures are able to get in there and do some more damage to the probe line. Hider with a nice harassment here. In the meantime, the vultures also come around this pylon wall off and try and kill that off. So this is getting a little bit crazy. Attempted harassment is coming in here from Crank. Moves in with the Reaper. Reaver. God damn it. This reminds me of our first ever cast of Starcraft, where I always used to call them Reavers. Now this is getting a little bit weird. Harassment all over the place from both players here. Hider is able to harass this fourth base of Crank. The Reaver is coming around the side yet again. Tanks coming in, as well as the Vulture. So some damage is going to be done here. Crank's going to have to actually get a surround on this thing and do something about it. The Dragoons are able to come in and clean this up without too much of a problem. In comes the Reaver. There we go. Couple of Zealots drop down. He actually just drops the Zealots in to kill off a tank and says, you know what? I don't need to drop that Reaper. Reaver. Bloody hell. Tank drop coming in from Hideortoss right there, doing some damage, but cleaned up quite nicely by Crank. The dropship is able to get out of there, but without the tanks. Not too good. Crank finally seems to have stopped this drop harass from coming in. He's been able to handle it for the most part. This Reaver is still active on the map, and we're seeing an Arbiter addition here from Crank. Also researching the stasis field upgrade. And that's what the stasis field does. Disables enemy units. However, it can also be cast on friendly units, so you've got to be a little bit careful. Very, very dangerous ability if you can lock it down. Crank looking to try and clean out this minefield, and he's going to be able to do that, but not without losing a couple of zealots. The action is all over the place right now. This Reaver is still alive. The Dragoon force is active. However, the Arbiter is now in play, allowing for cloaked Dragoons, as well as the abilities of the Arbiter. So things are going to get a little crazy momentarily. And in he comes. Crank looking for the good engagement right there. He does have the cloak. The Dragoons coming in. The Zealots are able to absorb most of the fire. This is a fantastic engagement from Crank. Smashes the siege tanks. A couple of tanks get evacuated. And in the meantime, there's also a Reaver drop trying to handle these units here. He almost loses it. But that was a massive engagement by Crank. Really turned this game around. Smashed a huge force of mech. Absolutely fantastic. The Arbiter can also attack. It doesn't do a huge amount of damage, but it's pretty good. Arbiters are very, very pricey, by the way, for those of you wondering. But they are also very, very powerful units. And now he's going to move in on this force of vultures, which should be picked off quite easily. With that range, it doesn't look like the Spider-Mines are going to get detonated either. He should be able to pick those up without too much of a problem. There we go. He's got an observer in play. He's got 11 of them, for God's sake, so that's easy. And his amazing stasis grabs 2 of his zealots, which is possibly not what he was looking to do there. But never mind. Zealots moving in, trying to catch that out, but a couple of Dragoons coming in from the flank are able to deal with some of those vultures. Vulture count is still very, very high here from Hyder, but he is having difficulty. Tank down on the low ground is not able to fire up there right now. Harassment comes in, the Arbiter moves in this direction. The Dragoons move in from that direction. Attacks going in all over the place with this. And recall is also being researched here. Very cool. That allows you to teleport friendly units to the Arbiter. So we're going to be seeing some warp-in harassment action by the looks of it. Those of you asking about warp-in and whether or not you can have warp gates in Starbow, you can. It's later down the tech tree, but Crank has elected to stick with gateways because he wants to play Dragoon heavy, and you can't actually build Dragoons for warp gates. Hyder trying to get out of there as the Arbiter drives that tank away once again. Zealots harass and prevent the 4th base of Hyder from going down here. Want to keep an eye on those Arbiters because warp-in possibilities are there. There's actually... hello. There's an Arbiter going up to the side here. He may be attempting to warp in. I'm going to keep an eye on that. In the meantime, Skirmish is going down. He's trying to clear this minefield out, and he's able to do so. But Hyder set up a strong, formidable defensive position. This is going to be a little bit more difficult to break. Down go several Dragoons, so the Spider-Mine's really doing the job. There's so many of them as well. 40 on the field. Huge amounts of vultures. I'm really interested to see what this Arbiter's going to do. I have a feeling he's going to go for some kind of warp in play here. Crank trying to re-establish his forces. Recall is about done. Recall completes. Working on the Caterin core as well. I don't even know what a LiDAR transmitter is. I don't have a bloody clue. Let's keep an eye on this. The Arbiter doing a little bit of damage. Ah, wow. Scans cost no energy. Okay, that's pretty cool. Crank's going to move in, and I have a feeling he's going to try and warp in. I'm not sure what he'll be able to do here. Harassment forces coming in, massive drops, triple dropship coming in from Hyder. Wants to try and take this out. In the meantime, the Arbiter comes in, and that is going to be an Arbiter recall. Huge amounts of Zealots now warp directly into the base of Hyder, who's in a huge amount of trouble, but he has deployed a significant number of tanks. He's a little bit busy dealing with the harassment that's now all over his main and natural here. And another Arbiter recall right into the 3rd base of Hyder as well, who is going to end up losing even more units. Spider-Mines go off, but they also kill the tanks as well. More Zealots are taking damage from the Spider-Mines, and units overrunning this. And the Arbiter actually survives. Great control there by Crank. EMP is being researched to try and deal with this Arbiter harassment here, but this is problematic. Down goes the Arbiter finally. Huge amounts of damage has been inflicted here on the infrastructure of the Terran player, however. This harassment continues to go on. It has done a lot of damage. I mean, you can see workers killed for both sides is pretty high, but eventually these Dragoons were able to clean up the tank drop harass coming in on that 4th base of Crank. 4 bases for either side right now. Possible 5th base coming up right here for Hyder. Hello, though. The Reaver is still alive, ladies and gentlemen. After 20 minutes, that Reaver is still there. I don't know if it's going to live through this. We'll see. There are already Goliaths in place to drive away that drop harassment here. However, there are Dragoons moving towards that point. They would die pretty horribly if they tried to engage directly against these tanks, especially with the upgrades. Tank currently does 80 damage splash. Ugh. It's absolutely brutal. More drops and more Spider-Mines being cleaned up here by Crank with his massive observer count. And this one hero Reaver that's just been blowing up everything all over the map. Trying to deny Hide's 5th base and is able to do so quite handily. Another big drop coming in. Each of these has a tank inside. And we're going to see the drop immediately here from Hide. No, it didn't actually lose a dropship, so that's very nice. Should be able to gun down that photon cannon without too much of a problem. Oh, the Reaver has been dropped, and it does not finish firing at Scarabs. Finally, it has fallen. That is very sad. A nerve jammer was actually dropped down there to try and reduce the amount of damage that's been done. Siege tanks are in play now. These Dragoons are walking right into them, but there's far too many Dragoons. A quick hot pickup right here from Hide, who is able to get out of there. And yes, he does have the upgrade, I believe, for the dropships, which allow them to pick up siege tanks, meaning that the micro is significantly easier. But what is this? That is a graviton catapult on the way, folks. We might very well be seeing carriers. It's looking very, very likely. There are also some units called Sentinels, but I don't know if Crank's going to bother to build them. He's playing very Brood War-esque, not building any of those extra units. He's building the units he's familiar with, which I think is to be expected. Zealots positioning themselves quite handily. That tank is going to get absolutely slaughtered if it tries that. A lot of spider mines going down right here. Crank's going right into it. This could be a little bit dangerous for him, but he's able to use the Zealots to drag most of the spider mines away from the Dragoons, and is now going to fight his way through. Very nice. He breaks that defense once again. The vulture count is now significantly lower. A few more spider mines have been deployed, and it looks like the vultures... no, they're not going to engage directly against the Dragoons. There's the detonation going off, and it actually kills a bunch of Zealots more so than anything else. A little bit of harass, and then running directly into that giant cloaked army of Dragoons. Very scary. And off goes Hide. The 5th base now established here for Crank with plenty of photon cannons, which, by the way, you can chrono boost for extra damage. Just bear that in mind in Starbow. There's a little tip for you. Zealot is able to smash its way through very, very easily here. Arbiter is now working its way through here as well. Just sitting up there saying hi. Might not want to do that. There are Goliaths on the way. And 2 more Stargates and 4 carriers currently in production right here for Crank. Good lord. Massive amount of variety that we've seen in this game so far here from both players. A lot of drop harass. Action all over the map. Very hard to actually keep an eye on. And honestly, even with the large ball of Dragoons, not really a big death ball kind of composition from either player. They're skirmishing all over the map. They're trying to do damage in little pieces. And if you death ball up anything in this matchup, it seems like you just end up dying horribly. If you death ball up your units, then they can end up getting stasis. Oh, but if you death ball them up like that, you get EMP'd and then smashed by 85 damage siege tanks. So that is not a good idea. The EMPs nuke both of the Arbiters before stasis can go down, as a massive number of spider mines deployed all over this. This is a really dangerous position. You can't approach this via ground. You just can't do it, and you certainly can't do it with a death ball. It will die. There are other possibilities, like, say, using Blink Stalkers. That might be able to do something about that, but you've still got to think about clearing out those spider mines, which is going to be much, much more difficult. However, unbeknownst to our Terran hero, there are carriers on the way, which is absolutely the answer to what's going on right now. With no Vikings on the field and no direct way to deal with these carriers, I have a feeling that the Terran player is going to be in a world of trouble very soon. 6 Arbiters, that's a tad excessive. Just a few too many Arbiters maybe there, but Crank is confident this is the good idea. Lots of scans going down. Of course, with that lighter upgrade, that's working pretty well. 1 Dragoon knocked out. He's trying to break this position. He should be able to do it, but it's going to a pretty big choke point here, and it's going to take significant damage. Stasis goes down. It nails a couple of units, but look at that. On the high ground, 2 tanks are just absolutely murdering this ball of Dragoons. However, the stasis goes down to prevent that from happening. But Crank charging into a very dangerous position there. It looks like it's going to get flanked as well. Vultures coming in from behind to try and pick off the weaker units, placing spider mines. Crank is making his way up, trying to get out of the way. However, as we are all well aware, there are carriers on the way, another 6 being made right now. Crank destroys what looks to have been the 5th, possibly 6th base of the Terran there. And it's kind of trapped out in the middle of nowhere. He would be able to use his Arbiters if he could get them out there and recall out. And Hyder's going to say, look, you know what? I'm going to trap you in there. And that sounds great in theory. But, as we noticed earlier, there are carriers in the way. A nice little tank drop actually comes in from Hyder, which kills most of those Dragoons. Very dangerous. As I say, you cannot underestimate tanks in this particular mod. Absolutely not. They wipe out Protoss units really quickly. So you've got to be really careful about bunching your units up. It's a very dangerous thing to do. If you're able to split your units up, then tanks don't really do that much. So you've got to be careful with your control. Vulture Harass comes in once again. Cannons being built to try and throw that back, and they seem to be able to do the job quite nicely. However, cannons do have a little bit less in terms of HP. They actually only have 200 total, including the shields. But here, we see the force that's coming out here from Crank. 9 carriers and 4 more on the way. Air weapons level 3 coming in. And really, right now, there is actually no answer from Hider to that whatsoever. There's 13 Goliaths, which is not going to be enough, I think, to kill that many carriers. And here come the carriers, and catching this force out of position, the Goliaths are going to get gunned down incredibly fast, and we're going to see a lot of dead tanks as well. No answer to those carriers whatsoever, so this carrier transition is absolutely doing the job. And suddenly, Hider's thinking, oh, you know what? I've got 35 siege tanks. That's not going to do anything against this. Fantastic transition coming in right here from Crank, and Hider's suddenly in a world of trouble. Crank having secured 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bases. And Hider's army composition just not the kind of size it needs to be. He's going full on into Goliath production, which does, if I recall correctly, require a tech. No, it doesn't, actually. You can build multiple. However, as you can see, the Terran player is really bleeding gas right now. He spent a huge amount of gas on tanks, and he can't actually build up his Goliaths. The amount of money that Crank has is obscene. He's floating massive amounts of it. He's been very efficient throughout this entire game, and I think actually he may have built too many probes. In fact, he told me after this game that he did, so that might have something to do with it. And these carriers now coming into play, and Hider does not have an answer. Goliaths will not do it. There are not enough of them. There are far too many carriers with the +3 upgrade, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the GG. The Arbiter carrier transition comes in and buries Hider after a very long and exciting game. That felt fresh, you know. That's what I really like about this mod. It feels so different. There's skirmishes all over the map. If this was a Terran versus Protoss in Starcraft 2, it would have been Marine Marauder Medevac for the most part. Very unlikely it would have been mech. We would have seen initially, of course, Zealot and Stalker, into something like Zealot Immortal or Sentry Immortal, anything along those lines. And then, of course, we would have seen Colossus or Templar, and a switch between the two as the Terran player is forced to switch between Ghosts and the Viking unit in order to deal with that. So this was a hell of a lot more dynamic, in my opinion. And we also would have seen ball after ball, really, of units just kind of being thrown at each other, and the Mothership Core allowing for some really good defense against drop harass. And you don't have that as the Protoss here. So you've got to be really mobile. If the opponent's going to drop tanks and decimate your mineral line, you have to respond to that. You can't just allow Photon Overcharge to actually deal with it. More to the point, since Crank never actually used any warp-in, even though there is an actual warp-in available here, he wasn't able to warp in units in response to any kind of harassment. So he could have used warp gates, he could have transitioned through and changed these into warp gates, but they wouldn't have been able to build Dragoons, which was the mainstay of his army, and they take 10 seconds to warp in, not 5. So it's much more difficult to respond to that kind of harassment without actually sending some units. However, there are exciting ways to do that. Have a look at this. As you can see, Rift, you can teleport up to 5 ground units to the Nexus using energy. So you can actually teleport units back off the field to help out, which is pretty cool. And of course, you can also use your Arbiters for a very similar role as well as attack. It's cool. I mean, this is exciting stuff. This really, really is. This is a mod that's been in development now for 2 years, and now that we're seeing some pro players actually trying it out, it's resulting in some really dynamic games. And I think perhaps there's some lessons that can be learned here for Legacy of the Void, and I'm hoping that Blizzard is watching, because look at the style of game that has been encouraged here. Look at what happens when you don't have Colossus and a Mothership Core. Look at what happens when you don't have Marine Marauder Medevac balls all the time. This is kind of neat. Maybe we should be seeing more of that. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much to Crank, and of course Hider, for providing us with this really exciting game. Please do check out Starbow. EU and NA servers. It's available on the arcade under the name Starbow. There are several different maps. This map goes by the name of Fighting Spirit. And for those of you who may be watching from Korea or any of the SEA territories, we are looking to get Starbow uploaded there as well. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. And big shout out, of course, to our sponsors that make these videos possible, PlanetSide 2 and WASD Keyboards. I'll see you next time.